a Mark Brown Arthur chapter book. King Arthur, text by Stephen Krensky, based on a teleplay by Peter Hirsch. To our good friend Marilyn Hafner. Chapter 1. Everybody out, called Mr. Ratburn. The school bus carrying Arthur's third-grade class had come to a stop at Bear Lake. All around them were colorful tents and knights on horseback, filling the park nearby. As the students got off the bus, Mr. Ratburn told them to stay together. "Whoa," said Arthur, looking around. "This fair is amazing. It's just like being in the Middle Ages." "Stick with your partner," said Mr. Ratburn. "And take notes on all the historical details. They'll be useful when we compete in the games." A man dressed as a peasant passed them, pushing a cart. "Get your haggis here. Fresh haggis. 2 for $1. Buster jotted down some notes. Haggis. 2 for $1. He paused. "Hey, what's haggis?" "Disgusting," said the brain. "That's all you need to know." Mr. Ratburn suddenly stopped walking. A look of awe came over his face. "There it is," he said. "The golden griffin." He pointed to a glass case holding a trophy. The griffin had the body of a lion, with the head and wings of an eagle. "This award," Mr. Ratburn explained, "is given to the class that exhibits the greatest knowledge of the Middle Ages." "Has your class ever won it?" asked Francine. "No," Mr. Ratburn admitted. "We have not had that pleasure." Arthur heard the hint of sadness in Mr. Ratburn's voice. He nudged Buster. "Boy," he whispered, "Mr. Ratburn sure wants to win that golden griffin." "My class came so close to winning last year," said Mr. Ratburn. "If we all try our hardest, I'm sure this year we can come in first." "Of course we will," Arthur whispered to Buster. "What other class on earth does as much homework or—" Arthur stopped speaking, distracted by the sound of marching feet. He turned around as a small platoon of children wearing starchy uniforms approached. They were led by an older man who looked like Robin Hood's father. "Wow," said Buster. "I've never seen so many people dressed like that outside of the army." "Look at their buttons," said Muffy, who noticed those things. "That's real gold." "Glenbrook, Glenbrook, that's our school," shouted the children crisply. "Glenbrook, Glenbrook, we will rule. Go 0-0-0, Glenbrook." Robin Hood's father raised his hand, and the children came to a halt. "Ah, Ratburn, we meet again." Mr. Ratburn looked a little pale, but he still stepped forward to shake hands. "Good to see you again, Mr. Price-Jones." Yes, I'm sure it is. You probably thought your old teacher had retired at last." Mr. Price-Jones smiled. "But they won't let me quit. After all, I'm irreplaceable." One of the Glenbrook girls cleared her throat and pointed to a nearby sundial. "Excuse me, sir, but it's 10:14. Muffy let out a little gasp. This girl had on a bracelet she had admired at the jewelry store. But her parents had said it was too expensive, even for them. Mr. Price-Jones nodded. "Ah, thank you, Buffy. Well, time to prepare. See you at Merlin's Labyrinth, Ratburn. Don't get lost in the meantime." He let out a small laugh and led his troop away. Chapter 2. Merlin's Labyrinth was a maze with canvas sides stretched between a series of tent poles. There were 2 entrances to the maze but only one exit. As Mr. Ratburn had explained it, 2 students would compete against each other to see who could get out first. A man dressed as Merlin the Wizard stood between the 2 entrances. "Who dares to invade my sanctuary?" he demanded. "Me, I guess," said Arthur, who was standing in front of one of the entrances. And I, my liege, have come from afar to pick up your gauntlet as well, said a boy from Glenbrook named Chester. Bravely spoken, my lad, said Merlin, gracing Chester with a nod. Arthur fidgeted. He wished he had thought to say something like that. Now Merlin raised his arms above his head and spoke sternly, the first to escape, a point shall win. The other one will perish within. Remember, Chester, said Mr. Price-Jones. Navigate by the sun and the tops of trees. And remember your ball of string. Chester nodded and checked his pocket. Mr. Ratburn patted Arthur on the shoulder. Arthur, he said, just use your head. On your mark, said Merlin. Get set. Hie thee hence. Chester darted into the maze while Arthur stood blinking in the sunlight. That means go, kid, Merlin explained. Oh, said Arthur. Then he entered the maze as well. He ran down the canvas hallways, turning right, then left, then right again. He had no idea where he was going. He just hoped that if he ran around long enough, he might come upon the exit by accident. When he came to an intersection, Arthur stopped to catch his breath. He wondered which way to go. But the canvas gave no clues. It all looked the same. I'll go left, he decided, and started off again. But after taking a few twists and turns, Arthur came to a dead end. I'd better turn back, he thought. Then Arthur saw a silhouette standing on the other side of the canvas. At first he thought it might be Chester, but when he raised his hand, the silhouette did the same. He stepped to the right. So did the silhouette. Finally, he scratched his head. The silhouette scratched, too. Arthur lowered his arm. HMMPH. It's just my shadow. Now, maybe Arthur had simply gotten dizzy from so much running around, but he thought he saw his shadow go on scratching even though he had stopped. Startled, Arthur fell backward and tumbled into one of the canvas walls. Riddip! Arthur burst through the canvas, stumbling out of the side of the maze. Guess I really did use my head, he said. But that won't help you now, declared Merlin, coming up to inspect the damage. You, young sir, are disqualified. At that moment, Chester emerged from the exit. The winner! Merlin proclaimed. Arthur looked back to where the rest of the class was watching. Nobody met his gaze. They were all staring at the ground in disappointment. Chapter 3. After the disaster at Merlin's labyrinth, Arthur felt a little dizzy. While the rest of the class took turns competing, he found a shady spot to sit down. Arthur felt bad about messing up in the maze, but he told himself it wasn't all his fault. It wasn't like he had a lot of experience with mazes. Arthur remembered the ancient Greek story about Theseus, who found his way out of a maze by unraveling a ball of string behind him. But nobody told us to bring any string today, he muttered. Chester, however, had clearly thought ahead. A loud groan drew his attention. Just behind some trees, a bunch of kids were lined up in front of a large stone. The stone was about the size of a wheelbarrow. It looked like a perfectly ordinary stone except for the fact that a sword handle was sticking out of it. Arthur heard the groan again. It came from the kid who was holding the sword handle. She seemed to be trying to pull it from the stone. She was not having much luck. Next, said a peasant who was overseeing the girl's efforts. Arthur walked up to him. What's this line for? He asked. He or she who pulls the sword from the stone is truly our king or queen. 'Tis an equal opportunity sword. That sounds fair, said Arthur. But the peasant wasn't done speaking. All your might won't set things right. 'Tis a gentle hand 'twill rule the land. Arthur waited his turn, watching all the kids ahead of him fail in their attempts. Arthur didn't understand why it should be so hard. If the sword had been put into the stone, surely it could be pulled out the same way. But when he finally got his chance, he did no better than the rest. Ugh, hi, he groaned. But the sword didn't move. Arthur wanted to try again, but Francine interrupted him. Arthur, she shouted. We have to go. It's time for the tug-of-war. The Lakewood team and the Glenbrook team stood on opposite sides of a muddy pit. Each side was holding one end of a thick rope. A ribbon had been tied in the middle, and whichever team could grab the ribbon would win the contest. So far, though, the ribbon had not moved much to either side. We must use brains as well as brawn, Mr. Price-Jones called out to his team. Remember the ancient Egyptians building their pyramids, and pay heed to Archimedes. The Glenbrookers paused for a moment. Then they pulled sharply together. Oh, cried Arthur as he and the other Lakewooders were yanked forward into the mud. The winners, announced the herald standing by, indicating the Glenbrook team. Afterward, Mr. Price-Jones walked over to Mr. Ratburn, who was picking himself up and wiping dirt from his pants. Surely, Mr. Price-Jones declared, you remember Archimedes, who said that with the proper leverage, he could move the world. Apparently, your students haven't learned that yet. Apparently not, said Mr. Ratburn thoughtfully. Apparently not. Chapter 4. After their group defeat in the tug-of-war, Arthur's classmates entered other contests individually. Francine competed at archery. Her best shot landed right in the middle of the yellow bullseye. Try and beat that, she told her opponent, Colleen. Colleen just smiled. I'll do my best, she said. She licked the end of the suction cup, then fired her arrow. It landed directly above Francine's and then slid down, knocking Francine's arrow off the target. Francine gasped. How did you do that? She said. Colleen shrugged. I've seen the adventures of Robin Hood 134 times. I've picked up a few things along the way. Muffy wasn't having much better luck on the tennis court. The ball used in the Middle Ages was much heavier than the one she was used to. When Buffy served to her, the ball knocked Muffy's racket right out of her hand. My point, said Buffy. Muffy bent down to retrieve her racket. Where did you learn to play like that? Muffy asked. Oh, King Henry VIII was my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-uncle. So you see, we've been playing tennis in my family for a long time. Just before lunch, everyone went down to the lake. Buster lay on a picnic table, looking at the clouds. Francine and Arthur were brushing dried mud off their clothes. We're getting pulverized, said Francine. We might as well just give them the golden griffin. Arthur sighed. It's not our fault that we're playing against computerized robots. I feel sorry for them, said Buster. Arthur and Francine looked shocked. You do? Said Arthur. Why? Asked Francine. Because, said Buster, they have that guy for a teacher. A teacher like that would be my worst nightmare. You're wrong there, Buster, said Mr. Ratburn, coming up behind them. Mr. Price-Jones was the best teacher I ever had. His students were amazed. Really? They said together. Oh, yes. I remember him well. You know, some people say I'm a tough teacher. No, said Buster. Who says that? Asked Arthur. Yeah, who? Added Francine. Mr. Ratburn smiled. Oh, a teacher hears these things. But I'm a softie compared to Mr. Price-Jones. Why, when I was in 3rd grade, he made us learn Latin. I still remember conjugating the verb to be, sum es est, summus estis, sunt. Of course, we did more than study, said Mr. Ratburn. He pushed us at recess, too. The body is a temple, he often said, and we need to honor it by exercising. Gee, I've never thought of my body as a temple, said Francine. She stood up a little straighter. Mr. Ratburn folded his arms. I learned a lot. It makes me wonder sometimes if I should be tougher. Arthur, Francine, and Buster exchanged panicked looks. An even tougher Mr. Ratburn? Thought Arthur. Win or lose, they had to keep that from happening. Chapter 5. In the medieval banquet tent, both classes were sitting on opposite sides of a long table,